Alrighty, how's it going?
Good. How are you today?
Doing good. Okay, so we have a specific talk today, but only kind of specific. So I sent you
Mhm.
a video.
Right.
Garland Farms did a video on clothing and how fur and wool and these various different things that are made from animals they last forever, and how all the polyesters and latex and all the different clothing materials we use, um, they put chemicals into the air. They are bad for the environment, and they don't last long, so we have to keep mass producing them. So anyways, what's your take on that video?
All right. So, I mean, I have heard of Garland Farms before briefly. A couple of vegans that I follow on Twitter have had interactions with him. And I noticed right away he posted when he starts talking about vegans, he's got a picture of vegan games,
Mm,
right away. And it's like, look, I'm not that down on vegan games, but his style sometimes I understand why he's off-putting to certain
mhm,
people. He can be kind of obnoxious, especially when he was critiquing Alex, the way he was kind of going off in that video. I don't know if you saw that, his
mm,
response video to Alex no longer being vegan. I mean, to me, it was just really kind of over the top. And so I feel like right away, Garland Farms he's using somebody like Vegan Games to represent veganism. And I'm
mhm,
already like, well, there are other choices. And I noticed towards the end of his video, he put Earthling Ed in there, but he didn't
mhm,
lead with Earthling Ed. I thought that was an interesting choice. But the thing that got me right away with him was his repeated insistence at the beginning of the video, throughout the video, that these materials that he's going to critique are being promoted by vegans. Like
mm,
somehow veganism goes hand in hand with promoting nylon and acrylic and polyurethane and all of this stuff. I have to say, I've never seen an advocate for veganism specifically endorse any of those things. I mean, vegans may say that those are alternatives to wool,
mhm,
leather, fur, or whatever. I don't see them going out of their way to promote those. Most vegans are eco-conscious people.
mhm,
Okay, maybe it didn't start that way. Maybe there are still some vegans out there who they don't like environmentalism, and the green movement being conflated with veganism because they are different things. But that being said, over the last, I'd say 5, 6 years, even longer than that, the sustainability movement and the vegan movement have converged on so many areas that
mhm,
wherever you find vegans, you're going to find a good percentage of people who are very conscious of these issues. So the idea
mhm,
that vegans as a whole are promoting these ecologically damaging materials is just false. I
mhm,
think at best you can say there's probably a number of vegans who are not fully tuned in to the issues that he raised in the video with those materials. And that's
mhm,
fine. That's fine. Like, I don't, as far as it goes, I basically agree with the idea that all of those synthetic petrochemical alternatives to leather and fur and etc., they're not good for the environment. But that brings me kind of to the next point here, which is that there are so many eco-friendly plant-based alternatives to all. I mean, and it takes literally like 2 minutes to just look this up. The way that he picked on the petrochemical based alternatives as if that was it, as if
mhm,
vegans have not been promoting. I mean, even before I would get into these discussions on Twitter, I knew about cactus leather.
okay.
When we got new furniture for a house, um, made sure it was vegan and the most sustainable fabrics and fibers that were available for us to purchase.
Mhm,
Um, and it's way beyond cactus leather now. Fruit leather, mushroom leather. Mushroom leather is going to be a massive industry. Um, but not only that, we talk a lot about these days about cell-based meat, whether it's grown from cells or that whole fermentation process. I think it's the same process. I get confused sometimes. I don't know the science that well, but like I hear fermentation and I hear stem cells. I think they're the same process, but like,
mm,
um, or maybe there's two different processes involved. But either way, like fermentation, those processes are also being used to create um, leather and like actual leather, not plastic leather, not fake leather, not even plant-based leather, but actual leather, in the same way that the cell-grown, the lab-grown meat is actually meat grown from cells. They can now grow leather in a very similar way. They can make, I was reading a little bit about the chemical processes yesterday and today, and like how collagen is part of is a big part of like what gives the leather its texture. They can grow that from yeast. The biotech basically is heavily invested in coming up, doing the same thing with clothing material as these other tech startups are doing with meat and dairy. So that's a big, that is going to be a huge industry. I mean, the other thing that he didn't mention in his video, and this is, again, this is another one of those things that I've known for some time, because this stuff comes up on Twitter. Every couple of months or so, I see like a new wave of like, oh, you vegans and your plastic leather. So I kind of looked into some of this before, and the process to make leather, I don't know so much about wool and fur, but I know that the process of making leather is very toxic. It is extreme amounts of pollution, poisoning the water, poisoning the land. And a lot of this production takes place in developing countries. I mean, Pakistan, India, countries like that, where there are very few safeguards in place. And there's a lot of people who get poisoned by the chemicals that are, I mean, tanning leather has always been a chemically intensive, environmentally ruinous process, and it still is today. And as, of course, demand goes up and that industry gets bigger, the spread of toxic chemicals used in that process has also grown. So none of this got mentioned in the video. Now, I don't think he's wrong to say that if we were only talking about the environment, you might be able to say, sure, leather, wool, all this stuff is better for the environment. Let's put aside the animal ethics and just look at the environmental impact. Probably has a point there. But to act like it's a false choice, there are other alternatives that exist now that are being developed now. And then he's ignoring the costs of the production of his preferred product. So even if it's not as bad, let's say, as all of the other things you mentioned, it's still having a big impact on the environment as well. And I think it might be debatable what's really worse in the long run. But we can set that debate aside. I can give him that for the sake of argument, even though I'm not even sure that's true. But I would even give that for the sake. But here's my bigger problem with all of this stuff. And I've been talking for a while, so I don't know if you want to.
No, you're fine. Go for it.
Okay. Well, my bigger problem was this, and it's the same problem I brought up last time when I was talking about, well, what about the plight of the slaughterhouse workers? And I said, one of the things I said in response to like the whole debate about slaughterhouse workers and how much empathy we should have for them, like how much empathy would we have if we were talking about human children going through the slaughterhouse? And again, it's like, I don't want to say I don't care about the sustainability issues. I mean, I do care about that. But at the same time, if we were talking about human skin, we would be having a much different conversation. And I don't think sustainability would be the thing we'd be debating the most. All of these debates are premised on the idea that animals just don't matter, that their pain doesn't matter, their suffering doesn't matter. We're just going to have this debate over what's more harmful to the environment, or what works out better for humans. And very, very clearly, like, vegans want to bring the discussion back to what impact is this actually having on the beings whose skin and fur and hair you are harvesting. So back in the day, we were talking a little bit before about Christianity, and back when I was Catholic, I was pro-life, and this was some years ago, not really my position today. But there was a pro-life apologist who I always thought he put the issue very clearly, very well. And he said something like if abortion is not murder, then no justification for it is necessary. and if abortion is murder, then no justification for it is possible, right?
Mhm.
And he would say this in response to pro-choice people who would bring out, what about this impact? What about that impact of outlawing abortion? And he would always bring it back to that core issue, and try to get you to take a position. Is it murder? Is it not murder? You know,
Mhm.
and of course these days I would come down firmly on the side of it's not, for reasons we can discuss another time. I
Yeah.
know that vegans get into that debate as well. The
It's
whole
it's one of my favorite topics, and I think we could cover it well for my
I
other
remember
channel.
talking about it on your
Oh,
Facebook
okay.
page some time ago. It was a long time ago, maybe last year.
Yeah.
But yeah, that could be a whole other discussion.
But I
But my
like the idea that it's covering like the idea of it costs too much money to raise a kid or this or that. Like if it's wrong, then that part
yeah,
doesn't matter. And if it's right, then you don't need that argument.
right, and I don't know if I would go as so far as to say that if it's wrong, then none of that stuff matters at all. But if it's wrong, I do think that that's where we need to spend most of our time. You know,
Mhm.
if it's wrong, then whatever benefit that you're claiming to get out of it had better be really proportionate to
Mhm.
the wrongness you are endorsing. And I think when it comes to things like whether it's meat and dairy, whether it's fur, leather, or whatever, the benefits, the fact that there are alternatives, the fact that the benefits that we get from it, we wouldn't make those arguments again if it was human skin we were talking about. We'd say, wait a minute, we can't do that to human beings. I don't care what benefits you get. I don't care if it is more biodegradable to use human skin than these plastic fake whatever products. We just
Mhm.
don't do that to human beings. Okay, why
Mhm.
not? And then I'd like to get into that double standard of why animal suffering, pain and suffering doesn't matter. Why it's okay to, I mean, if you ever watch the videos of how they get wool at some of these places, why it's okay to just torture these animals,
Mhm.
to rip them apart while they are still alive and breathing, while they are screaming in pain, while blood is everywhere. I mean, I don't want to get too graphic in these descriptions because that's something I try to avoid. I don't like to see that stuff on my timeline because I've seen it already. But it's very graphic. It's very disturbing, and
Mhm.
that is a sentient creature that is experiencing pain in more or less the same way we would. Maybe
Mhm.
without some kind of existential thought about the meaning of the pain or whatever, as if that somehow makes the pain any better or worse. But on a physical level, are experiencing that pain. If somebody came up to you and just started ripping your beard out of your face,
Mhm.
that feeling is what they would feel if you just, when you go up to them and you start doing the things that I've seen done to them in these videos. So unless you have some kind of dominionist theology that God put the animals here for us to abuse and torture, and therefore their pain doesn't matter or whatever, some kind of, and I don't think that's necessitated by Christianity, but I hear that stuff a lot. Well, that's why God put them here, or even worse, they're not moral agents, or whatever stupid argument you've come up with to rationalize, that kind of pain and suffering. Well, I'd rather at least talk about that, because once we've settled that issue, then it doesn't really matter
Mhm.
what you get out of it, unless it's a question of survival. I mean, again, and we've talked about this before, and vegans are always talking about it. Well, if it's a question of survival, then we can make some exceptions and we can be a little more flexible. But when it's clearly not, and this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, it's a profit-driven industry. So I don't want to hear about humane this and that, because you're not going to have truly humane standards when everything's geared up for efficiency and maximizing profits. Um, uh, you know, uh, I don't, that's where we need to have the discussion at. So I think I'd kind of, there was one other thing, unless you want to jump in. I got
No, go
one
for
other
it. Yeah,
critique to
you're
make.
fine.
Okay, one other critique to make was that towards the end of the video, Garland Farms he kind of said in passing that, these environmentally harmful materials, that vegans would want to make us all use by force. Even he threw in this thing about force, so we want to force people to do things. And apart from in my view, just utter hypocrisy, when your whole way of life depends upon forcing these animals to do things that they don't want to do to suffer pain that they would not otherwise want to suffer. No animal wants to suffer the way that people like him would want to make them suffer. But apart from that hypocrisy, I just wanted to say, like, if I was the supreme dictator and I was going to impose my will on everyone, we'd all be doing the biodegradable stuff and not the stuff he was critiquing in the video, the nylon, the acrylic, the spandex, and all of that stuff. Like, no,
Mhm.
I wouldn't use force for that. If I was going to use force, I'd have you all wearing hemp robes, you know, and wearing cactus leather and stuff like that that is actually biodegradable and better for the environment. So that's what I would force you to do if I was going to use force. Although,
Mhm.
you know, I'm not necessarily endorsing that either. But
Yeah.
those were my thoughts on his video.
Gotcha. Okay, so do so I don't have much knowledge on the sustainability stuff. My take on how we treat animals is based on the ethics. So I am curious if you, since you probably have way more knowledge than I do you know of a fabric that is constantly used that you would think of as the worst for the environment?
Well, yeah. So I was looking into that a little bit, and I don't think animal products are at the top of that list at all. I mean, we can be honest about that.
Mhm.
Um, the least sustainable one uh, that I found, and I'm just going because I still have it pulled up here. I think the least sustainable fabric was polyester,
Okay.
and followed by acrylic, and even conventional cotton, just because of the amount of resources it takes to just grow it and produce it. So even certain plant-based fibers that don't involve any chemical uh, synthetic components to produce, if they're resource intensive, they get a low rating
Mhm.
for sustainability.
Gotcha. So in your personal opinion, do you think we should not use those three? Like if you go and see, like, because most like t-shirts are made out of cotton.
Mhm.
Do you think we just need to work towards getting them from companies that don't go through the wild processes? Or is it the fact that so much is grown? Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to imagine if that isn't grown, something else will need to be grown to make something. So does cotton have a bigger negative impact being grown than like something like hemp?
Um, the way that it's grown, if it's not organic, I think so. Organic cotton and organic hemp are very good, but again, there's a reason why they're not as widespread. And I feel like we're going to get into a lot of the same territory that we get into when we are talking about regenerative agriculture and stuff like that. It's like, is it better for the environment? Sure. It's still having an impact. And then if you start scaling that up, it's still going to have a pretty big impact. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to say the same thing that I would in the debate over food. It's like, if you can choose a less impactful material, then I don't see any reason why you wouldn't do that. So I don't know. I think it's that simple. Just do your research, do your homework. I try to do that to the best of my ability.
Mhm.
But yeah, and you can get recycled. You can get a lot of recycled clothes made out of recycled material too. Like, for instance, recycled polyester.
Mhm.
If you really, I don't know if you for some reason really like polyester. There's recycled polyester. There's
Mhm.
recycled stuff like that. So,
Do,
um, go ahead.
do you think if people just purchased less, consumed less, that it would be easy to make all the clothes we need, organic cotton, organic hemp? Because I feel like so many people just buy random stuff all the time, and then when they don't want it anymore, they get rid of it. But it's not because it's bad; it's just because it's old, and we're so used to like having new things. Like me, I don't think I've purchased a shirt or a pair of pants in 2 years. I just I wear the same things over and over again. And do you think that's a big part of the problem? Is people just buy too many clothes, so the clothes companies have to keep up with demand?
Well, I mean, fast fashion is one of the most just polluting, destructive cultural practices that we engage in the Western world. Kind of ties into everything that we're talking about. And I don't know how familiar you are with fast fashion.
I'm not. Is it just clothes in general that's just put out fast, or is it specifically a fashion thing, kind of like high fashion designers?
Fast fashion is just it's a production model. It's a business model. Just producing as much clothing as possible in a short amount of time as possible, the most efficient, cost-effective way to get out the most clothing in the shortest amount of time. And so much of it ends up as waste, and so much of it is synthetic because the synthetic stuff is cheaper, right? So all that stuff that Garland Farms was critiquing in the video makes up a big part of the fast fashion industry. So like, look, he and I are on the same page when it comes to how bad that is. The idea that that a vegan is somehow bound to that is just ridiculous. Though that's where the point of disagreement would come in. It's obviously very bad. You can watch documentaries on where a lot of this stuff ends up. It ends up, I mean, I don't want to say exclusively in Africa, but a lot of it ends up just polluting the waterways, clogging the waterways in Africa, in the trash, in these trash dumps and these floating trash heaps. I've seen a few documentaries just on where all this stuff ends up in the end.
Are you talking about byproducts from the machines that make the clothes, or you just mean the
I'm talking about
clothes eventually?
the clothes themselves.
Oh, okay.
They just end up like they get recycled and passed down, and I think donated to charity or sent over there. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly how they all get there, but I just know that a lot of them tend to end up there, and you can just see how they're clogging everything up, and there's just mountains of them, and I don't know, I don't feel like they're being used as a dumping ground. And yeah, but fast fashion is we do need products that are made to last. I agree. That was one of his things, in the video, and that's all of these anti-vegans, they bring up leather. Well, this stuff will last your whole life. Yeah, that's great. And organic biodegradable hemp or cotton alternative, well, that may not last your whole life, but it's also not going to pollute the environment. It will degrade. It will not be as polluting. So you might have to buy things like that a little more often. But again, I mean, I'm not super up on fashion prices, but I think buying plant-based clothing is always going to be cheaper than buying leather. Actual leather or actual wool. That stuff is expensive, as far as I can tell. It's not like, I mean, I could be wrong about that, but it just seems more expensive to me. Like back when I was not vegan, like a real leather jacket would cost a lot more than like a polyurethane jacket. So I that's always been my personal sense. I didn't, for this conversation, didn't do the deep dive into the like pricing and stuff like that, but that's always been my sense that the authentic leather is always a little bit more expensive than the synthetic alternatives. So yeah.
So when you say biodegradable clothes, which is something I hadn't heard of before, it sounds scary. So biodegradable, by what amount of time does that have to be biodegradable for that to be a thing? Like you can wear it for like 10 years, 20 years?
Let's see. So I didn't get specific numbers on that. It just means that eventually it will degrade over time. So I'm just kind of looking right now. Let's see.
Yeah, I know that like a lot of plastics will take, I don't know, like 500 years or something. So I never knew, like when you see at a fast food place or something, if they have biodegradable silverware, I wonder like how long that takes for something like that to break down, because it seems like hard plastic.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff on how long it will take to decompose if you compost it, which won't take that long at all. But I'm just looking about in terms of how quickly will your clothing decompose? Cotton, you might get 5 months out of it if it's the 100% organic cotton. So yeah, but again, I think this is all if you compost it.
Mm.
So I don't know. Because like it says here, linen 2 weeks. Like I've had linen shirts that have lasted me a couple of years. So I don't think that's right.
It's probably the compost. Yeah.
It's probably there's a lot of stuff on composting when you go and look for it. So I don't know. Yeah, we'd have to. I think. Well, and also I think part of the problem here might be this subjective, like how long, like what. Some people might look at my linen shirts that I've had for a couple of years and say, "Oh yeah, you got to get rid of those. Those things are starting to fray." Me personally, I look at it and I'm like, "Oh, looks fine to me."
Yeah.
So,
No, I'm the
uh,
same way.
in terms of wearability, I think that's probably going to be mostly subjective. But we're talking about like if you throw it away and it's in like a compost heap or something like that, how long will it take to degrade? Well, then yeah, then you get more specific numbers on that. We should all be
Yeah.
composting, by the way.
Oh, for sure.
Uh, but it's separate topic.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing I wanted to comment on, so I did a talk with Garland Farms
Mhm.
not too long ago, and it was right before he put out this fur video. And in the talk, we talked about fur because I think that's one of the easiest, like the idea that minks are put into little cages, they're removed from their natural habitat, and then they are just used for their fur. And I just made this comment like, at least if you are somebody's going to hunt like rabbits and eat them and use their fur and all this stuff, that we could all agree on the ones that are just used for their fur, it's not good. And somebody commented on that video saying, I should mention here that most mink ranchers are raising minks for mink oil, not fur. Fur is a byproduct. And let's see
Probably doing
the
that stuff with leather too. Leather's just a byproduct.
yeah,
Uh,
is there any truth to this that you know of? I haven't researched this
I
this
don't
yet.
I don't see why it can't be true, but I don't think it's true most of the time. I don't know about
Mm.
I don't know about mink oil. I don't know what the hell that is. I shudder to think what that even
Right.
is. It's a new horror that I haven't even heard of. But when it comes to leather, that is over $700 billion industry worldwide. There is
Oh,
no way
gotcha.
that that is just byproduct. Okay,
Mm.
especially when you look into the production in India, Pakistan, other developing countries, you better believe they are doing. They are that leather is not just a byproduct; it is part of the main business model. You
Gotcha.
know,
Here,
because it's a big source of revenue.
for
Mhm.
sure. Here, I'll finish reading this thing real quick. So it says only 25% of pelts are sold for a whopping $5 a pound. Uh, let's see. The rest is composted for fertilizer. The real market is in medical tech. So this is where the mink oil goes. Medical tech, cosmetics, and emollients. I don't know what that is. That use fresh rendered oils, which are omega-7. So I don't know. That's interesting. Vegan characters, yeah. So I guess that would just mean that if we were to say that we should stop using mink for fur, we should also say we should stop using mink for their oil as well.
Well, yeah,
But yeah, I
and,
just never knew about that.
and it seems that there are plenty of alternatives to mink oil as well. And here's the thing, okay, and just at a glance, it's like, okay, well, some of the alternatives to mink oil might not be as environmentally friendly.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm going to say, unless we're talking extreme environmental damage here,
Mhm.
that I don't want to hear it, because when you weigh, look, a marginal improvement in sustainability versus a lifetime in a cage, it's just not a contest for me. I don't want to. I refuse to have these discussions without going back to the sentient creature in a cage, that whose life is being just completely ruined by that.
Mhm.
So we're going to be talking about a really big increase in sustainability for me to even entertain that discussion. And I'm still not going to.
Yeah.
Still, in the end, I'm not going to say that it's okay to keep minks in a cage. But what I might be willing to do in certain cases is say, well, okay, I see your point, and hopefully we develop some alter, which again, the mink oil I was reading comes from the mink fat. That is something that they can, that sounds like something that's going to be replicated in a lab. That's going to be
Yeah.
lab and stuff too. So I don't see any reason we can't produce actual oils, mink oil, whatever kind of oil, in a lab setting. And I'm all for that because that doesn't involve putting them in a cage, obviously.
Mhm.
But I'm just gonna say until we get there, do without. And if it's marginally worse for the environment, that's a hit I'm willing to take because I'm not primarily an environmentalist. I'm primarily an ethical vegan.
Mhm.
I care about the environment, and I think we should be doing more. But at a certain point, the trade-off for me is not worth it.
Mhm. Yeah, you do the right moral thing, and then after that, you do the best you can do for what you need.
Right.
So okay. So just to get the final thought on the extreme of when you would find it acceptable to use, would you say that way back in the day before humans were good at making clothes in any form, that it would have been fine to hunt animals and use their fur for clothing?
Well, I think it'd be silly to say that it'd be okay to do it for food and not for clothing. And I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of vegans, and I would count myself among them, say, yeah, if it's that kind of situation where you need it for survival and it's your only option, well, then sure. And especially if, as many indigenous cultures did, there's a sacralization of that process. You know, um, they're not just going out and killing everything they see for profit, but they're making full use of the entire animal, and they're honoring it somehow in their kind of religious traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's okay. And so, of course, if you're going to hunt for, I don't think they had a concept. I could be wrong. I'm not an expert here, but I don't know if they had a concept of we're just going to hunt for food, or we're just going to hunt for fur, or we're just going to hunt for tusks. I think we're going to hunt and we're going to use the whole thing, and it's not for this specific thing I can get out of it, or that specific thing I can get out of it, but it's more a more holistic kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would say that that's fine.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. If you need something for survival, for your well-being, and there's no other approach to get it, yeah, no, I definitely agree. I don't think the thanking the animal for its sacrifice or any religious element of like a cultural like tradition within it matters. It's more so just if it's needed.
Well, okay. So, but on that point, I would say that if you have that sense of the sacred, that you're less likely to go out and abuse the ecosystem to take more than you need for some personal private gain.
Mhm.
If it is something that you truly consider to be sacred and important in that sense,
Mm.
sacred, it really just means like set apart. It means something along those lines. Like if you value it on that level, I think I mean, look, at the heart of the sustainability movement too, it's like, the conservatives always say, oh, you're a bunch of earth worshipers, you worship Gaia, you worship the trees and stuff like that. I think there's a way in which you could say that's true. It's sacred because we need it for life. And I think for a lot of indigenous cultures, that sacralization of that process was like, yeah, we depend upon this for our very lives. We are grateful for it. We
Mm.
value it. We venerate it. And I think that leads to an overall more respectful. And now I know what's going to happen is you're going to get people say, well, that's how I treat my animals on my farm, or that's how my farmer does whatever. And again, um, your farmer is in it for profit, especially today in the 21st century. Maybe there was a time in the past where you might have been able to say that and mean it. You can't really say that today.
Mm.
But whenever you bring this stuff up, well, everybody brings up their idyllic local farm where the animals all have names, and they even come and cuddle with the kids and all of that, all of this stuff. that's the story that a lot of these people like to tell when they're debating vegans online, but it's just nonsense. In the real world, these are profit-driven enterprises that value efficiency above all else, and there's no room for the sacred or the set apart or the special when it comes to making profits. The goal is to get it out, get as much as you can for as little effort as possible, and everything you try to do for welfare, any improvement you try to make for welfare for the animals' well-being along the way, that's adding costs to your business model.
Mhm.
And when people say, oh no, we don't, if you treat the animals poorly, well, then you don't get anything out of them. It's like, that's not true. When you have enough of them, doesn't matter. It's volume, it's scale. That's why this stuff is a lie. And it might be true in some marginal cases, but it is not true across the industry. So
Yeah,
the
I've
most
been
humane stuff is not going to sustain the demand of billions of people. It's just not. So anyway.
I've been hearing that a lot lately. The idea that the reason it's clear that they wouldn't treat, like, say, cows bad is because the stress would affect the taste of the meat. So they want the cows to be as happy as possible. Obviously, I have no way of knowing this. But
I think it's a load of nonsense by and large. I think it might be true. In some places, there are people who, and that stuff is more expensive. It's not the market. Okay, we're talking about overall practices here. And so I hope the people who say stuff like that put their money where their mouth is and really oppose factory farms, don't support them in any way, don't complain when activists go in and expose the horrors that are taking place, don't support ag-gag laws, don't support the criminalization of protest of investigative journalism, would vote for laws that would increase the cost of doing business, or shut these places down altogether. If they're really on board and they support all of that stuff and they put their money where their mouth is, well, then I think that the debate that we could have with them at that point could go a little bit better, on whether or not these truly humane farms, are they truly humane? Are they truly ethical? I'm fine with having that debate, and I feel like it's a more low-key debate, but I just get the sense that a lot of these people are lying about the industries that they support. So not all of them, but a good number, because I've just seen it happen in debates, whether I've been in the debate or somebody else is doing the debate. You get to a point where they are in fact supporting factory farms. They are supporting these practices. They're not really committed to opposing these horrible abuses. So I haven't seen really that level of consistency from these.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you one more question before we get going here.
Sure.
And it's probably the main topic I'm going to be talking to Garland Farms about when we have our follow-up conversation. I'm going to read a bunch of studies and some papers, and but I was mostly curious your thoughts on this, mostly on the ethical side, and we can bring in some hypotheticals. But so part of it is the details that go into crop deaths. So when I first heard about crop deaths, it was just the idea of the tractors tilling up the food and maybe some mice and snakes dying in the process. Those are accidental in some form or another, but those aren't a big enough deal for me to think about. Pesticides, killing insects, I'm not as worried about. And then it's not a vegan topic. If we're consuming pesticides that are bad for us, that's a separate conversation. And then there's another one, which would be hunters hunting animals that are going to harm crops. And in my mind, these are animals that are not enslaved and they're being taken out quick. It's obviously better than factory farming. But here's the one that gets me, and I want to know your thought on this. Rodenticides, putting out poisons for rodents to consume, so they'll die, and they die slow deaths, internal bleeding. I'm guessing there's a lot of suffering going on to protect our produce. Do you have any knowledge on like how many rodents this takes out? And would we want to factor in something like, because these are intentional killings, if we put these chemicals out for them to consume and die, it's no different than hunting in a sense. It's different than factory farming because they're not enslaved, but the slow, painful death. Would you imagine that a well-treated animal that's taken out quickly, if that produced more food than, say, the produce we would get from poisoning and making mice suffer, is there a hypothetical that would make it better to eat meat than to eat the produce that we're making these mice suffer for?
Um, it, it, it's a complicated question because I feel like we're always going to get back to the issue of scale, of population, of demand. Uh,
Mhm.
this stuff comes up all the time. And okay, so your specific question is, are there cases where it's better to eat meat ethically than
Mhm.
where the meat product would would be the result of less harm than say the plant product?
Yeah,
Um,
say I'll even make it a little more specific for you. Say you had a plate that had a piece of steak on it and a
right.
plate that had a couple cut up apples on it. And if we found out somehow, I don't know how to detect which animals suffer more, but that more suffering came from the rodents that were killed for these apples, a little bit more than the suffering that came from this cow, does that justify it?
Yeah. So apart from the difficulties that you've raised of quantifying this stuff, when
Mhm.
it comes to like, well, who suffered more? I've said this before, and this is where I will deviate from some vegans, maybe even a majority of vegans, but just in the sense that I'm very open about this. I think most
Mhm.
vegans kind of agree with what I'm about to say, but they don't really want to say it. But what I'll say is that there is it is not wrong in my view to consider the quality of life. Now, first of all, long, slow, painful death, poisoning, totally against that, and it's not necessary. There is such a thing as veganic agriculture, which does
Mhm.
not use those kind of pesticides, those kind of pest control measures. And we can maybe talk another time about veganic agriculture and the alternatives to that.
Mhm.
And whether or not that's scalable, that's a whole other debate. Um, okay, let's set that stuff aside. I'm against the
Okay.
poisonings, um, but that being said, I know, I don't want to stray too far here, but uh, the just looking at the life of a rodent, let's just say we're talking about just rodents being killed, not slowly, painfully, but just being killed
Mhm.
versus a cow just being killed. Well, cows can live for up to 20 years. Cows have higher levels of cognition. Cows and pigs have even more than cows. The typical farm animals have much higher, they live longer, they have higher cognitive and sentient capacities. They live, and so I think their experience and quality of life, the potential for a good quality of life for those animals left undisturbed is much greater than that of a rodent that is not going to live as long, that is not as cognitively developed, um, that is not having the same quality of sentient experience as the farmed animals. And I've said before, to me, that doesn't mean that it's okay to just torture rodents to death.
Mhm.
It does mean that I think their interests weigh a little bit less on the scales when we're determining these things. Like a cow is not a rat, a pig is not a cow, a dog is not a snail.
Mhm.
It's okay to say that stuff, but to a lot of vegans have committed themselves to this idea of rejecting speciesism. And what I just
Mhm.
said um, is technically speciesist. We are making
Mhm.
certain discriminations on the basis of species and basis of capacities. And I think we have to do that. I think that's a reasonable thing to do. Otherwise, where do you draw the line?
Mhm.
You can say that a lot of vegans are debating like oysters and stuff like that. We can go even further. I've seen trolls online. Of course, we all know plants have feelings, bro. What about
Mhm.
bacteria? Okay, well, bacteria live. They don't live that long. They live even. I feel like these are the things that we consider. Like, well, they're not really sentient. They don't live that long. We don't, and we can't really live without killing bacteria.
Mhm.
So it just seems really silly at a certain point to say all life and to be an absolutist and to be a totalist like that. So I think it's okay to bring in the different qualities of experience that these different species of animals have. Um, but that being said, yeah, slow, painful death for rodents is something I'm totally opposed to, and we need alternatives to that. I don't know if I think that that's worse than what happens to a cow. In the end, we'd have to get specific about what we're talking about, because I know they're going to bring up the pasture raised, grass fed, and that's less than 1% of the cows in the United States. Most of them are on feedlots, going through horrible slaughterhouse lines, and suffering terrible, horrific deaths. So I don't want to hear about that 1% of cows that might
Yeah.
have a gentler life and a quick death. You're going to, it's not fair to stack that up against a rodent being poisoned to death. Why don't we talk about what actually happens to the cow, or even worse, the pigs and the chickens who suffer
I
a
would
lot
say
more.
I would say an individual that's truly going to only consume cows from these big pastures or whatever. I would say I think that's great that they're making that choice versus eating the other stuff. But I agree on the big scale, it's not worth bringing up. Okay, so let's say this. Let's say you have a farm that does the poisoning of rats and then they die out slowly and painful. And then you have a different farm, and in this world let's say rats are nutritious for us. Okay, and so you have this different farm that doesn't poison rats. They just have like a thing where essentially rats like happen to go inside and then they're trapped in this cage, and then they can be killed quickly, so not a painful death, not the slow death like this other one, and then people can consume them. Would you say in this weird world, which this doesn't matter, but I like breaking down things on how we feel morally, would you say it's more moral to consume these rats that are captured in a non-harmful way and killed in the most humane way possible, to consume them over consuming the produce that caused the rats to suffer, if they were equal nutrition?
Yeah. Well, I would want to incentivize the least harmful behavior, I think. So sure, it'd probably be better to support a practice that is overall less harmful than one that is, that relies upon torture. So I think just the way you've described it, in this weird world, sure, I'd at least consider it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good. I think it's good to show, because I feel the same way, but I'd want to do more research because I don't have a full understanding of which animals have more capacity to think and have greater lives and all this stuff.
Right.
So I want to learn as much as I can, but in general, my go-to is I want less suffering. So if the option for less suffering involves death, I want to be honest and accept that, instead of just being the person that you're talking about, like your average vegan that might just say, nope, no animals can die. And I think it's good for us to be honest, because it shows that we're not blind to it. We're open to conversation.
Right. And I'll just add to real quick that about all the things you talked about too, um, you know, that like those poisons, it's not just rodents. I mean, sometimes wild animals get those poisons too, and they die slow, horrific deaths. We have to do a lot of damage to just the natural environment to do monocropping. And that is something that I think more vegans are being open and honest about, that monocropping is not great. But again, we are right to point out that I think it's fair to say most monocrops are going to animal feed, a majority. Then depending on what crop we're talking about, a vast majority, like when we're talking about soy, I still can't believe that soy production is a talking point with anti-vegans, when we just know for a fact that 77%, 75 to 77% of the world's soy is grown to feed to animals. There's another chunk of that goes to biofuels, and then maybe like 9-10% that is actually going to food intended for human consumption. And if we stop doing factory farming, we wouldn't need nearly as much soy as is grown today. I know with corn in the United States, a big percentage of that goes to animal feed. So you don't want to hear about the evils of monocropping from people who aren't really putting their money where their mouth is and opposing factory farming.
Well, that was the thing that Garland was talking to me about, was the soy thing, because he's big on that, and he was saying that for some reason, when the numbers are tallied, the biofuel, the soy used for biofuel counts as animal agriculture for some reason, and he was bothered by that. I
Well,
don't know.
but not in if you go to Our World in Data, I mean, they make that distinction, I think.
Oh,
Or
okay.
maybe it was a different source. I don't know, but I mean, I see no problem with, I don't know why you shouldn't have to include that for animal feed. It's its own thing. It's a third category. Um,
Hmm.
so
Yeah, I'll have to
it's
look into
fine.
that.
That's
Um,
fine. But I mean, he does acknowledge though that most of it's going to animal feed? I mean,
he
he's,
does not. He's very strongly against that. And
no, I was just asking, he acknowledges, he doesn't deny it. He acknowledges that it's going to that. Whether he's for or against it, he doesn't
no,
deny.
no, he says that most of it is not. It's going to the vegans. Um,
Oh yeah, to the 1%, 1 to 3% of the population is vegan. Okay, that's
yeah.
insanely ridiculous. Maybe.
He sent me a bunch of articles. I'm gonna read like 5 of them before we do our
Okay,
follow-up
fine.
talk. So
Yeah.
I'll
Maybe we
send
can
him
do
your way. And
I'm sorry. That's just to say it's going to be. I mean, if you want to say more than we suspect is going to human consumption. Okay, well, maybe you have some evidence for that. But vegans, come on, vegans are like 1 to 3% of the population. There's no way we're responsible for a majority of soy crops being grown.
Mhm.
That is, I mean, that is so obviously on its face ridiculous.
I think the idea of him saying going to vegans just means it's not going to
Okay,
animal. But
okay,
yeah,
whatever.
I'll have to look into the details. But though I did want to ask you one last thing before I
Sure,
got to hop off here.
sure.
What do you use to judge the idea of quality of life between animals? Now, in my mind, similar to if burning building, I would save a human over a dog, and I might randomly choose to save a dog over a sheep because I hear they're stupid. But I don't really know the research on it. What would make besides size difference? And I don't know if being a mammal means that you're likely to have a higher quality of life, but comparing, say, a rat's life to a cow, let's leave out the length of life for a second.
Mhm.
Do you know if there's a way to detect if they enjoy life more? Like not a cow on a farm, but let's say a wild cow, or let's say a deer, comparing a deer to a rat that are both wild.
Well, I think enjoyment is going to be a tough one, dependent because a lot depends on what exactly you mean by that. But where I thought you were initially going was just in terms of how do we know their cognitive differences? Well, I mean, they do test. I mean, there are animal behavioral studies that can determine the relative intelligence of these animals, what they're capable of doing and perceiving and carrying out. That's how we know that. I mean, pigs are as smart, if not smarter, than dogs. They might just be behind. You have chimps, elephants, and dolphins are the most intelligent animals, and then pigs might be number 4. They might be number 5. But we know that just from animal behavioral studies. Now, I don't want to say that in intelligence and enjoyment go together, but what I think the higher cognitive capacity means is that they just there's just a wider range of experiences that they're capable of having and processing. And
Mm.
so I would think their enjoyment of life is bound up with that to a certain degree, right?
Mhm.
I could very tentatively say that I think that a creature that is being allowed to live out its life in a quote natural way, in an undisturbed way, is probably enjoying life more than an animal that is crammed into a cage. We see,
Mhm.
I mean, the signs of distress are universal, for at least for mammals, for farmed animals, for higher, for animals with higher levels of cognition and brain development. Um,
Mhm.
well, signs of distress are universal. No animal wants to be crammed into a cage.
Mhm.
This gives me a good opportunity to bring up something that I've said before, because sometimes you'll get farmers who say, or farm apologists. I don't know if they're really farmers, but well, just look at the behavior of these cows. They don't even care about their calves. The behavior of these pigs. They don't care about the. Okay, and what I've said is like judging the animal behavior, getting animal behavior insights from a farmer is like getting human behavior insights from a prison guard, or a concentration camp guard. Your
Mhm.
environment determines the behavior that you're going to display. It's not all just
Mhm.
innate. And so these animals, and that you can see that if you look at how animals behave, not just in the wild, but on a sanctuary where they're cared for and they're protected. which would be the best case scenario. I'm not saying we can put every animal in a sanctuary, but when we do see them in sanctuaries versus how they are on feedlots and in factory farms, the differences are obvious. They are clear. They are obvious to anyone who is being honest and using the two eyes in their head and the brain in their head. You can see the differences in behavior. Yeah, it may be that animals who are in captivity and who are being abused and exploited every day of their lives are resigned to that fate and have adapted to that fate, just as human beings do. You look at human beings in a prison, in solitary confinement, any number of just bad situations like that, they will adapt. They will adapt to that environment. They will be shaped by that environment. They will, a lot of them give up hope. They become suicidal. They don't want to be there anymore. And that comes out in their behavior. I just saw a video. I don't know if you watched John Oliver. He just did a whole thing on solitary confinement, and they played just 20 seconds of audio of what it's like to be in a solitary wing of a prison. And it's just a lot of banging. A lot of guys just banging on the doors because they're going insane from just boredom and isolation.
I haven't seen that, but I guess there's a new Netflix series. It's a documentary where this guy goes to a bunch of different prisons all over the world to see what they're like. And somebody took over a prison and basically made it a good place to live. And they had people can be just out in the sunshine all day long. And yeah, it's a wild topic. And the idea of prisons kind of depresses me. So
I don't know if I can answer specifically about how do we know about enjoyment, in like a broad theoretical scientific sense, but what I can say is that I don't think animals are that different than humans when it comes to conditions like, say, solitary confinement or things like that. Like we respond to our environments, we react to our environments, and it's very clearly there are differences in behaviors. And just because they can't use language to vocalize their displeasure, you listen to that banging in solitary confinement, you find those videos of just like what it sounds like on a solitary cell block. There's no speaking being done there, but you can definitely hear the sounds of distress. And I think it would be kind of insane and ridiculous to say that, well, how do we know they're not enjoying it? How do we know they're not just, banging on the door over and over again for hours in celebration of their, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
At a certain point, you got to just, go with your eyes and your gut. Obviously something wrong here. So
I went to Petco to find some food for my guinea pig. I have rescue guinea pigs, and I saw this and I filmed it. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, I can see it.
It's just this mouse in this small cage going crazy. Like that has to be brain damage. And there's no way that's going to be a good pet after all that brain damage. So it must be to feed a snake or something. But yeah, it's
So behavior like that, I think it's obvious that they are not having a good time in there. And I think people lie to themselves when they try to deny that. And if you don't believe it, just compare and contrast.
So really quick though. So, okay. So I do find it fascinating that scientists have looked at these animals and they know what certain ones on a scale of the most intelligent. And I'm sure if they've looked at all the animals, they could just rank them all. And I don't know if if being a mammal changes it versus being, say, a rodent or being like a lizard or whatever. But if you're in some weird situation where you were out in nature and somebody was going to shoot like a deer or shoot like a raccoon or to shoot a possum, and you had to pick one, and they're like, I'm going to kill one of these, but I'm going to let you pick which one. Is there something that you would know, or would it be based on just what the science has figured out about how intelligent they are? Or would it be clear to you that you think these others would have a better life?
I don't want to make a huge deal about brain size, but I think just kind of intuiting the likely brain sizes of the different animals would probably tell you a little bit about their cognitive capacities. Now, that's not absolute. I mean, I think dolphins and whales obviously have bigger brains than we do. That doesn't necessarily mean they're more intelligent, right? But I do think there's kind of a threshold when it comes to this. I don't know how closely brain size and shape are linked to the rankings of animals and their cognitive capacities. I think they are loosely correlated. I don't know if there's like a cause and effect that's been established. I'd want to look at the literature more on that, but I do think there's a correlation. And so that might be my rough guide, but also just, I don't know, just considering their overall behavior and again, their lifespan. I think that's correlated with their relative intelligence levels too. And I'm not sure exactly why, but it does seem to kind of work out that way. So
Gotcha.
I think about things like that.
Yeah, for sure. I like that. I I think about these things a lot, but I haven't quite figured out
Yeah.
my answers to them. So I like hearing other answers, and then
Mhm.
I definitely want to do more research, and find out what the science finds out. Kind of like I usually talk to people about insects, where if we have no reason, let's say 100 years ago, 200 years ago, if we had no reason to think an insect could suffer, then we don't even really have to think about them. If they're overcrowding our shelter or our food or something, and we just kill them and it doesn't matter. But if we learn through science that they can suffer and they are actually feeling pain, then that should change the dynamic of how we treat them. And we're just constantly learning and figuring it out. So
Yeah.
yeah. Cool. Well, that was a great talk, and I
Yeah.
better hop off here, but I'll probably see you again in a couple weeks.
Yeah. Sounds great.
All right. Take care.
Same to you.